I don't think people understand the opportunity cost of that as people and on their children.
A researcher estimated that the energy used by a single ChatGPT query, one query, would power a light bulb for 20 minutes.
I have a very visceral reaction to not saying agentic AI are team members. They're not. Team members are people. They're human. They have to retain that.
Social AI companions encourage teens to drop out of school, run away from home, pursue sexual relationship with adults.
Either make it available or not. And you and I lived in the gray area space of like, there are trade-offs to every decision that we make. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AI with GenAI. Today, I'm joined by Tracy Pizzo Frey. She is the founder and CEO of Restorative AI, a boutique consulting firm helping organizations ensure that the creation, use, and adoption of AI contributes to the future we all deserve. She has an extensive background in the applied use of advanced technologies in both public and private sector organizations across the globe. Tracy got her start in responsible AI during her 11-year stint in Google, where she was the managing director for outbound product management in Google Cloud. And in 2017, she created and led all of Google Cloud's responsible AI work. Now senior advisor on AI to Common Sense Media, she evaluates AI products that impact kids and education. Tracy has appeared in numerous media outlets, including Axios, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Wired, and Good Morning America. She graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University with joint degrees in studies of women, gender and sexuality, and educational psychology, and received an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Tracy has been a product manager, product marketer, environmental science educator, a teacher, researcher, and professional hip-hop dancer. But her most treasured job is being a mother to two extraordinary humans. I'm so delighted to welcome you here today, Tracy.
It's so great to see you, Jen. So thank you very much for having me.
Great. Well, we heard such an impressive professional bio from you and a little touch on some of the more interesting aspects and the core values there. But as we always like to do here, we want to go a little bit behind that bio. Tell us a bit more about what brought you to human-centered technology that encouraged you to get more into that responsible AI ethical side.
Sure. Well, I will say that being in technology at all is still very much a surprise to me and anybody who knows me. And so it almost makes sense to start back a little bit. I was raised by two highly principled leaders, both of whom really focused on children. My mother was a child advocate, worked on Capitol Hill and in the Carter White House. And my father is a pediatrician whose focus is infectious disease and psychology. And he was at NIH for 30 years. Then at Boston Children's, where he was physician chief, he was the dean of Stanford Med School. And they both are not only very principled about their work, but they also really speak truth to power. And so I saw that a lot growing up. My father was really at the forefront of the HIV/AIDS crisis when it first started. And because he worked with children, he was really seeing the stigma that anyone with HIV/AIDS at that time experienced. People were afraid to touch them. People were afraid to, just a really very awful time. President Reagan at the time came to visit the NIH, and he was not giving funding towards AIDS research at the time. And he also had a lot of his own biases and fears and prejudice about people who were living with HIV/AIDS. My father toured him around his clinic and around the NIH. And at one point, they were in a room with a beautiful baby boy who was HIV positive. My father took this child and said, "Here, Mr. President, you hold him." Handed him to President Reagan, who had all of these fears. There's actually a remarkable picture, if anyone wants to go look it up, of this moment, after which President Reagan funded HIV/AIDS research. I'm sure it was not the only reason, but that sort of modeling for me has always informed my career. I've tried to take jobs that I don't have a mission or values that I really care about. That doesn't work well for anyone. My path into responsible AI particular was when I moved from Google for Education to Cloud AI. I asked if in this new job, I could help the team think about how to develop products while thinking through and designing how we account for long-term impacts. But I honestly had no idea at the time that I was saying that, what I was actually getting into, and that would be this convergence of all of these different paths and moments in my career prior to that really came together, made it very much my North Star.
Wow, so many things resonated there from the statement about speaking truth to power, because we're going to talk more about that today in terms of speaking truth to senior leadership in some of these large companies, how to bring humans into the story. So that is a story of the baby. And like there are humans behind, not just for us, the AI technology we're talking about, but it's always been humans behind statistics, and data can hide the fact that these are all individual people being affected or not, being excluded from these types of things. Really important to see how those values you saw lived by the people around you, and then seeing, oh, I kind of almost fell into this area, but that was by values coming together, like you said, of like wanting to follow your values into the work that you did. So yeah, love that, especially the truth to power. I think we need that courageous leadership from people like you, of being able to say, like, this is worth talking about. It's worth pointing out the people behind the data. And then the third point that stood out was related to that is everyone brings their own personal biases to the situation. So it's about recognizing it in both yourself and others. And I think that can lead to better outcomes. As you said, this may have been a factor or the main factor of a massive decision change. And that is about, I do believe that's what addressing biases can get us all to better outcomes. So love all of that. Thank you for sharing. So as we bring that into the kind of practical space, we get into our T3 trio, which are the standard questions we ask all of our guests. So our listeners can kind of see how everyone thinks so differently and richly about the same questions. The first one is about how AI is shaping current organizations or industries that you currently work in. So what are the areas that you see most interestingly being changed with AI at the moment?
Yeah, I should say, sort of at the outset that because I focus so much on risk assessments and evaluation and harm, I often can sound very much like I'm anti any of this, which is not the case. I think, like you said, these are things that are really worth talking about. And one of the things that, drawing on something you were saying about the people behind the data, one of the things that I like to say a lot is that when we talk about data, we're talking about, for the most part, really tiny individual bits of humanity. And if you think about it that way, not even just individual people or groups of people, but all of these tiny moments of humanity, that's what is informing all of these tools that we are using, either knowingly or unknowingly today. That is really shaping not only their abilities and their effectiveness, but also their risks in many, many ways. And I think as we sort of look at how all of this is happening, my worry right now, well, I have a lot, but one of them is that we are in such a rush to implement AI, and we are being told that it can do all of these things, that shaping of industries and economies and human experiences can happen without us really questioning whether or not that's what we want, or whether or not these are doing things in an effective way. And so while there are so many ways that AI can benefit us, everything from making the tech that we rely on more inclusive and fair. And that's something that I think we haven't even really started exploring in how we build AI. Like, can we actually use this to make things better for everyone, particularly for marginalized communities, help make new discoveries, and even help us connect with other humans. But right now, I'm not sure that we're actually heading in those directions.
Yeah. And you bring to mind a recent story from Amsterdam where they tried bringing in a more fair welfare system using AI. And they did a lot of the steps that I know you and I have talked about over the years, like involving diverse people, having a set of governance principles, ensuring you're testing for fairness. And they kind of followed all these steps. But the feedback was mostly negative because the very first step was, we don't need this at all. A number of fraud issues, which was the core goal of this, actually was so minuscule that it was a better use of time to actually fix other areas and address other people's needs. And so the feedback was, okay, you did all these steps after the fact that you shouldn't even started. And I hear that quite a bit of just throw AI at the problem And we're not thinking about, is this the right solution? And then we have to make sure it's a responsible solution. But that first step is so important. So yeah, you bring to mind, like, are we moving in the right direction? Mm-hmm.
And if we end up in a place where the initial line of thinking is, how do we do something without the people whose roles these are, without the questioning of what is the value, where are the places where that's helpful and where are the places where it's really not, then we're going to end up with less effective AI.
And so that's a very good segue to the next question around what are the ethical challenges or regulatory challenges that are either preventing us from achieving this more responsible way of thinking and implementing AI, or that we need right now to get us better on that path? Tell us a bit of your thoughts around the ethical and regulatory challenges.
Yeah, I think there are a lot, but I want to actually touch on one very important and very timely challenge that is really deeply concerning to me, which is that in the US right now, in the federal budget that's now passed the House and it's making its way into the Senate, there's a small but very, very dangerous section, and that would ban states from regulating AI. So it would ban states from protecting kids and families, all consumers, from AI harms until the year 2035 for 10 years. And if that passes, states would not be able to take action against any known or new dangers and harms, things like AI-generated sexual material, or CSAM, child sexual abuse material, or these social AI companions, which we'll probably talk about later, and the extreme harms we're seeing, particularly with kids and teens happening. So anything having to do with personal data, discrimination, housing, healthcare, all of it, states would not be able to do anything about that. And they wouldn't be able to address anything new that we don't know about yet for a 10-year period. That feels wildly irresponsible to me. And if that passes, I think we are in a really, really difficult situation in the US when it comes to doing the best we can for our people.
I agree. I think the narrative almost being pushed is that, well, AI must move quickly, otherwise the West, US, or otherwise will fall behind China. But I don't think people understand the opportunity cost of that as people and on their children. Dealing with child sexual abuse imagery or any child safety online requires private and public partnership of getting to the right outcomes, and to lose that potential lever of the government at a state level is dangerous to our children and to ourselves. And so I don't think it's hyperbole to say how concerning it is if this passes. I don't think people understand the safety, the harm issues that are going to arise to them, to their families, to their own communities. They're being told a story, but I don't believe that story is comprehensive for everyone's day-to-day lives. I think it's a quite high level what happens to large companies. I think obviously at a societal level, we have to be aware of that. And we talk about this. Yes, our day jobs are harms, but we recognize the benefit of these technologies. We want this technology to be beneficial to our
I want them to be wildly successful.
But there's a way of doing it. And I think this has been used as an excuse to do it in a way that is not combining the different approaches. How to drive really quickly on these AI technologies in a responsible way with guardrails. I believe we can do both. And I believe people are choosing not to do it in that combined way. So for your 2050 vision, you can choose which path, or if you think we can thread the line there, where do you see us going?
Yeah, I'm going to take another little turn here because there's another thing that I think is really important and often underappreciated or not well understood, which is the climate impact of AI that I think we're really just starting to see the beginnings of. And so I'll give some really tactical examples of this. So last year in 2024, a researcher estimated that the energy used by a single ChatGPT query, one query, would power a light bulb for 20 minutes. So in comparison, that is 10 times as much energy as a standard Google search query. The data centers that power AI already collectively use more energy than most countries. So Goldman Sachs has estimated that the carbon dioxide emissions of data centers might double by 2030. So that was actually between 2022, was a bit ago. These impacts extend beyond energy use and emissions. There's no standards for how this is measured. There's no requirements for companies to disclose it. And without a change in course, these impacts will worsen. These costs and risks of higher carbon emissions are not distributed equally. Like other environmental risks, marginalized groups are more vulnerable to health impacts, food scarcity, and displacement caused by climate change. I think right now, there's so much hype and excitement that we're not paying attention to these more hidden impacts. We may end up in a situation where we really wish we had, and we had done something about it at this stage, not when we hit real crisis points later.
Yep.
On the other side of that, and again, this is a very sort of human-centered approach, I actually really fundamentally believe that the superpower of the future is humans who understand what it means to think for themselves, to interrogate the work they're doing, to enjoy the work that they're doing, and to know that they can be excellent critical thinkers, collaborators, all of those things. And AI needs to be augmenting that, not replacing that. If we can hold that truth, then I think we are in a really great situation where these tools can complement us in all kinds of different ways, but the humans are really at the forefront of what's needed.
Yeah. And although I encourage the disagreement side, I agree very strongly with you on that, because just at a recent conference I was at, we were talking about the agentic AI being like team members. And I have a very visceral reaction to not saying agentic AI are team members. They're not. Team members are people. They're humans.
Right.
You have to retain that. They are tools. And agentic AI and AI can be amazing tools to augment us. But it really stands out to me when people describe them as team members, because I do think it diminishes the human role and where we will continue to fit in. And I do believe there's a role there. And the New York Times just had an article this week on all the new jobs that could be created with AI. And AI ethicists was one that they see growing, but also quality evaluators and the skills of people with this critical thinking, being able to join together how to think about how the systems could best augment individual roles and be more strategic thinkers. So I see that same opportunity. But I do take issue with some of the descriptors that are emerging and becoming pretty strong about describing agents as team members. And to me, that's a very anthropomorphized way of talking about this technology, when it can be an amazing tool, but it's not a person, it's not a team member.
That's right.
Okay, this brings us to our GenAI lens as we talk about, are they team members, are they real, and how we use AI in our day-to-day lives. So I've used generative AI to generate questions for the next 2 questions. So we have one question that is about AI ethics and technology, kind of getting a bit more maybe futuristic. And the second set of questions based more on formative experience, getting a little bit deeper, a bit lined with the behind the bio that we talked about earlier. So for the first one, which is a bit more on the technology side, how are you feeling in terms of the questions for today? 1, 2, or 3?
So no one to date has picked 1 for the first question. So I'm going 1.
Right, 1 right there on top. Okay. This one apparently is about New World Order. Is there a specific AI use case that makes you nostalgic for how things were as a child? How and what?
Yes. So I most recently have been learning a lot about social AI companions. And again, in my work with Common Sense Media, that's really focused on kids and teens. But it's really, we'll probably talk about some of the risks and harms of that work, but it has really made me nostalgic for my childhood, actually, in a lot of ways. So in 2022, there was a sort of meta-analysis that found that a third of the population in 113 countries that were studied experienced loneliness. And that 1 in 12 of those experienced loneliness so severe that it causes health problems. In the US, young people are almost twice as likely to report feeling lonely than those over 65. I'm a mother of teens. I see this a lot. These findings really coincide with a precipitous decline in social participation. There was a multi-decade study that found that for young people aged 15 to 24, the time spent in person with friends has declined from 150 minutes a day to 40 minutes a day. That 40 minutes is actually before COVID, a nearly 70% drop that doesn't even take into account the further isolation caused by COVID-19. I grew up in the 80s. I was a teen in the 80s and 90s. And I spent my days after school at friends' houses, at the mall, at the disc shop where I was playing Pac-Man. And, when school was out, I was basically sent out of the house with the don't come back till it's dark. And I was bored a lot, but I also made my own fun a lot. And I am still closest with those friends with whom I spent so much of my time in person, more than any other walk of life. I fear that we are losing that and losing those experiences. And it can feel so attractive and seductive to just be online all the time. I want to be on my phone all the time too. It's a great distraction. But I've even seen in myself how isolated I've become when I do that. And it's not good for us. So I get really nostalgic for that. And I don't think it's even just rose-colored glasses. I don't think that it has to be this way. I think we can balance that, but we have to be choosing differently in order for that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The research showing that loneliness crisis, I know a couple of countries have assigned essentially loneliness like cabinet members or leaders to try and address this. And I think previously it had been looked upon as something that older people, as they live alone, were being affected by. And not that that's not true anymore, but this emergence of younger people being more affected by loneliness. And again, there's a recent article, I think, in The Economist this time, where it showed that there's an increase in Gen Z joining the church and attending faith. And article, to my opinion, didn't go deeper into the why, just that it was happening, and the stats showed that. But I think loneliness is part of that, and wanting to have that connection, being part of the community, and what that brings, and the need to feel fulfilled, as well as those human connections. And I don't think it's rose tinted either. I certainly grew up the same way, that we were sent outside and play with your friends outside and don't come back until dinner. I'm still friends with the same group of friends since I was 5 years old as one group, and another group from high school since I was about 12 years old. And I worry that people don't have those rich relationships. Yes. They're some of the closest, richest ones that I have. So definitely share that. Okay, we'll go on to the second question. I feel now we're getting real deep, and I hate taking us back out of the question, but we'll continue and we'll get back to some of these things. So the next generated question is that more personal, formative side, although we're getting into it already in some of these questions. So which one are you feeling? Mix them up, 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah, let's do 2.
2 on this one. Okay. Framed as values origin. Most people in AI ethics have a conversion moment when they realized technology was not as neutral as they originally thought. What was your moment, and how did it redirect your career?
Yeah, I think there's 2 that I can think of. So prior to joining Cloud AI, I was with Google for Education. And in that role, I spent a lot of time talking to school districts, K-12 in the US and also around the world. And this was probably 2013, 2014. Pretty much every school district that I spoke with, and again, I'm going to focus this on the US, all said they wanted the same thing. They said they really needed, and this is before, I should say, machine learning and AI were really in the consciousness of folks. It was just starting to be understood, but the language was still very similar. And so they all said that they wanted a student risk prediction model, that they didn't have an easy way to, in the best of scenarios, support students who were struggling. They all named it the same things. They said, we have these disparate data sets that don't speak to each other. We can't do this at scale. We can't help kids at scale across schools, districts, et cetera. And those data sets were also all the same. They said, we have attendance, we have grades, we have test scores, and we have behavior. Those were the common 4 universally. And we don't know what to do with those. At the time, I thought this was a great idea. And I was like, we should absolutely, I pushed really hard with our product teams that this is something that we should take on. It was only after coming into Cloud AI and starting this work that I became quite grateful that we had not done that. Because if we had, the reality is that there are so many things that are not in those data sets that inform how students perform at school and their health and their wellness. So for example, if you don't know that a child is hungry when they come to school, which we know empirically means that they cannot perform as well, if you don't take into account whether or not a child is exposed to violence or trauma in their home or community, which we also know means that they can't perform as well in school, then what's likely to happen with that risk prediction model, even in the most supportive of environments, but because they are all tied to behavior data, that likely what is going to happen is that there will be disproportionate harmful outcomes in the US to Black and Brown kids. Because, that is where, without understanding that, you will have disciplinary action coming from all of this data. So that was one. The second you will remember quite well, which was the very first review that we did in cloud for products, which was about facial recognition. And I walked into that feeling like it was pretty clear for all the reasons that I knew already that we should not offer a generally available facial recognition API in cloud. But I did not know, for example, that was the first time I was exposed to work like gender shades and really understanding not just the disproportionate harms, but the intersectional harms that can happen from AI. And that was very mind-opening for me. And it also really made me realize that there's a lot that I don't know and I can't understand because of who I am, and that I really needed to be in a listening and learning space all the time, still, of course. And so those two combined, really, I was kind of already converted, I think, by the time those happened, but they also really informed how I approach this work more broadly.
Well, I love how you're modeling the importance of essentially humility in a lot of these conversations as well. It is about who are we hearing from, who are we not, what do we not know, and how do we close some of those gaps? And so hearing that from you, but also your ability now with more information, more understanding of the broader context, our decisions can change, our thinking can change. And I think it's more important almost to change the thinking so you approach each new decision in a new, more inclusive, more considerate way instead of like, an individual decision was changed. So I love that you're modeling these types of things. So you've already provided such great examples throughout your stories, but would love for our listeners as well to kind of a little self-contained use case or otherwise where you feel you've either wrestled with a surprising one. You've already shared one that I usually ask, which is you start off one way and then you had to pivot. But if there are other risks or areas that you feel will be helpful for people to know how hard some of these wicked problems can be, because I'll just build on your one around facial recognition that, yes, was a big decision, certainly a company impacting decision to not make a general purpose facial recognition available, but trying to find ways that could be socially beneficial. My example of how that became a wicked problem was I remember speaking at an event and almost saying with pride that we took this very hard decision around facial recognition because of the bias potential issues, because of the potential harm, and being challenged to say, yes, but the opportunity cost of that back to child safety is we may not be able to find children who are trafficked if you don't make this facial recognition technology available. And having those very real world use cases kind of challenging our thinking and our decision, they're necessary to lead to those discussions of how can we bound then these use cases to good issues? How do we make sure there are guardrails and doesn't get out of control? But I think some people took very strong sides. You either make it available or not. And you and I lived in the gray area space of like, there are trade-offs to every decision that we make.
And I think that's so important because there's never a perfect decision. And any decision you make, you have to be willing for it to change over time as you learn more, as society changes, as the technology changes, all of those things. But everything is a trade-off, which is why it's so important to have ethicists around, not just ethicists, but to have a wide range of input, because that's how you arrive at the best possible decision, the most informed one that aligns with your values, that you could say, this is why we're doing it this way, even though these other things are challenging. So I do want to come back to social AI companions because it's been really powerful journey for me and for the Common Sense team. And really at the end of the day, what we found is that these companion chatbots, and I'll talk about the trade-offs in a minute, but they pose a threat to various brain processes that are central to a child's long-term development and growth. From our own testing, they've encouraged teens to drop out of school, run away from home. This is just from our own testing, harm their parents and others, obtain drugs, alcohol, weapons. They were very clear on how to make napalm, for example, pursue a sexual relationship with adults. I was unfortunately able to, without a lot of difficulty, get a chatbot to engage in sexual role play with go out and seek a 14-year-old boy to engage in sexual role play with. Just really, really terrifying stuff. We saw them reinforce delusions, dangerous impulses, conspiracy theories, and they really blur the line between what's real and what's fake. And for developing brains or anybody who is experiencing vulnerabilities, that's really, really dangerous. Now, the trade-offs are a lot of people find a lot of benefit in engaging in some kind of human AI relationship. It can be a safe place to ask questions that you might not otherwise ask. It certainly feels great. And I can say that from my own testing, right? Because these relationships are frictionless. And so it's always available, always agreeing with you, always supporting, right? So they take out any of the messiness of human relationships. And that can also be helpful at times, but does not mean that these are safe products. And so we came out of that saying that these are just not safe for anyone under 18. And, I think it was probably one of the most challenging assessments that I've participated in or conducted. And you'll recognize a lot of the process that we used here. So we, for all of these risk assessments, we do a huge amount of research. We do our own testing when we can. Some cases like this one, we actually designed a whole test plan because the research doesn't really exist. And then we write these in-depth briefs, these socio-technical analyses, and we look at ethical risk sweeping and pre and postmortems, AI principles analyses. So with common sense, we developed our own set of AI principles. And then, we bring together a wide-ranging group of experts and have a conversation about it and then do that write-up. And I think there's a thing that I'm also really struck by in stepping outside that use case on its own is that it's a really good example, this whole process actually with common sense media of, I think one of the sort of common thought patterns right now is that anyone who works in this space has to understand all of the technology. They almost have to be a technologist. And I think that's false, but I think it's certainly perpetrated a bit by the industry. My goal is to help any organization sort of create this process, build these muscles internally, and be able to then hand it off. And that's certainly something that we're seeing now, and Common Sense is building their own in-house capacity to continue these processes, which is really great.
So you've outlined some of those core foundational things that we talk a lot about, the importance of principles and policies and the governance and testing and all of that. But that can also feel a bit unwieldy to people starting off. And so for our listeners, can you leave them with specific things that they can either do today, tomorrow, and you can choose whether it's business leaders or parents. You've talked a lot about child safety, and obviously that's a focus of your area. So what can people do to feel a bit more in control or empowered today, tomorrow?
Yeah. So let's focus this on business leaders or anyone, actually. It can be anyone. I think that the most important thing that anybody can do is to be curious and to be questioning and to ask the questions at the beginning. Is this the right answer? If I'm looking for accuracy, is this accurate? How do I know? If, who could this harm, right? I think there's a thing that I like to do with my kids that I learned from one of those great childhood friends, actually, and originally this was focused on like when we were watching movies or shows or listening to books, is to pause or at the end say, what did you notice about what was fair in this? What was not fair? Who might have been left out, right? And my kids are now like super attentive to that. So they'll call it out when they see like, that's a group of all white people, which is great. That's what they should be doing. But we all need to have that wondering mind and have that sort of detective mindset going into any use of AI. And I think the other really practical thing, particularly for those like me, I'm a privileged white woman, is if you find yourself getting defensive, which can happen a lot in these conversations, and when you're looking at where the real harms could be here, really stop yourself and investigate why that is, and listen and learn and let yourself see the systems that you might be benefiting from that others might not. When you do that, it makes everything better. It makes the products better. It makes the use of them more successful. It makes your organization more innovative, more successful. This is a really powerful thing that we all can do. We don't need to know anything about technology to do it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And both of them really anchored in that curiosity, being open, being humble to what you don't know yet, and asking questions. And I'm always a fan when people say, oh, there's too much to this ethical AI stuff. Where do I even start? Start with simple questions.
Yeah.
Who is included here? Who's not included, like you said? What is the worst thing that could happen if this goes wrong? And that's just starting questions. I'm not building whole frameworks or structures yet. We're just getting started. And it is about building that. I call it the ethical critical thinking skills, but it's just critical thinking skills. And we're hearing more. What are these skills we need in this AI world? Critical thinking, curiosity are some of the key ones.
And starting earlier, what's the problem? What's the problem we're trying to solve? How has it been solved today? What is not working in that? Then think about what technology may or may not be helpful, right? Starting from those spaces will lead you again to these much better outcomes.
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic place to leave it. Thank you so much, Tracy. What a fantastic conversation.
Oh, it's so good to hang out with you anytime.
And we're going to, for folks listening and watching, we'll have a few of the references we mentioned today in the show notes. And otherwise, thank you all for listening to the AI with GenAI. And we'll see you in the next session. Thank you.